The South African Broadcasting Corporation is the state broadcaster in South Africa, and provides 19 radio stations as well as 4 television broadcasts to the general public. It was also known officially in Afrikaans as Suid-Afrikaanse Uitsaaikorporasie, but this term is now only used by the SABC when referring to the corporation in the spoken word on SABC2, Afrikaans TV News, and on the Afrikaans radio station Radio Sonder Grense. However, the Afrikaans newscasts on SABC2 use SABC Nuus instead of SAUK Nuus. The term is still used by other Afrikaans language media. Opposition politicians and civil society have often leveled criticism at the SABC, accusing it of being mouthpiece for the ruling African National Congress. During apartheid, it was accused of playing the same role for the previous National Party government. Company history. Early years. Radio broadcasting began in South Africa in 1923, under the auspices of South African Railways, before 3 radio services were licensed. The Association of Scientific and Technical Societies in Johannesburg, the Cape Peninsula Publicity Association in Cape Town, and the Durban Corporation, which began broadcasting in 1924. These were then merged into the African Broadcasting Company in 1927, owned by I.W. Schlesinger, a wealthy businessman, but in 1936, these were sold to the SABC, established that year through an Act of Parliament. The SABC took over the African Broadcasting Company's staff and assets. It maintained a state monopoly on radio until the launch of Radio 702 in 1980. Although the subscription-funded television service Mnet was launched in 1986, the SABC had a monopoly on free-to-air television until the launch of TV in 1998. During National Party rule from 1948 onwards, it came under increasing criticism and accusations of being biased towards the then ruling party. At one time, most of its senior management were members of the Broederbond, the Afrikaner secret society, and later drawn from institutions like Stellenbosch University. The SABC was a radio service until the introduction of television in 1976. There were 3 main SABC radio stations: the English service, the Afrikaans service, and the commercial station, Springbok Radio. Programs on the English and Afrikaans services mainly consisted of the news, radio plays, such as the Forsyte Saga, Story of an African Farm, The Summons, written and produced in South Africa, serious talk shows, BBC radio shows, children's programming, such as Soundbox, light music broadcasts featuring South African talent, such as orchestras, arrangers, musicians and singers, accomplished musicians such as pianist and composer Charles Eagle were featured on all 3 stations on a regular basis in shows like Piano Playtime. Accordionist Nico Carstens was a regular on the Afrikaans programs. Recent history. On the 4th of February 1996, 2 years after the ANC came to power, the SABC reorganized its 3 TV channels, so as to be more representative of different language groups. This resulted in the downgrading of Afrikaans status by reducing its airtime from 50% to 15%, a move that alienated many Afrikaans speakers. The SABC has since been accused of favoring the ruling ANC political party, mostly in the area of news broadcasting. It remains the dominant player in the country's broadcast media. Criticism of the public broadcaster intensified around 2003 to 2005, when it was accused of a wide range of shortcomings including self-censorship, lack of objectivity, and selective news coverage. Radio establishment. Following its establishment in 1936, the SABC established services in what were then the country's official languages, English and Afrikaans, with the Afrikaans service being established in 1937. Broadcasts in languages such as Zulu, Xhosa, Sesotho and Tswana followed in 1940. Springbok Radio, the SABC's first commercial radio service, started broadcasting on the 1st of May 1950. Bilingual in English and Afrikaans, it broadcast from the Johannesburg Centre for 113.5 hours a week. The service proved to be so popular with advertisers that at the time of its launch, commercial time had been booked well in advance. The station featured a wide variety of programming, such as morning talk and news, game shows, soap operas like Basis Bravo, children's programming, music request programs, top 10 music, talent shows and other musical entertainment. One popular Saturday noontime comedy show was Telephone Time, whose hosts would phone various people and conjure up situation comedy, a similar brand of humor to the films of Leon Schuster. By 1985, Springbok Radio was operating at a heavy loss, after losing many listeners with the handing over of its shortwave frequencies to Radio 5 and facing competition from television. It ceased broadcasting on the 31st of December 1985. SABC News Service. The news service was established in June 1950, replacing the programs of the BBC. Although this was because the BBC broadcasts were seen as giving a British viewpoint of current affairs, there were also concerns that the SABC service would become overly pro-government, or our master's voice. By 1968, it had over 100 full-time reporters in the main cities and local correspondents all over the country, with overseas news provided by Reuters, AFP, UP and UPI. There was a news film unit which, prior to television in 1976, produced films for news agencies and television organizations. SABC Symphony Orchestra. The SABC Symphony Orchestra has its origins in its 3 studio ensembles in Johannesburg, Durban and Cape Town, and the Municipal Orchestra of the Johannesburg City Council. When the SABC centralized its broadcasting in Johannesburg, the future of the 3 ensembles were in doubt, but at the same time, the Municipal Orchestra of the Johannesburg City Council had been disbanded. The SABC was able to form an orchestra of 80 musicians from these groupings in 1954, and while its main base was at the Johannesburg City Hall, it would tour the country. The orchestra would be led for many years by the SABC's head of music, Anton Hartman, but had other conductors such as Francesco Manda and Edgar Cree. There were also international composers such as Igor Stravinsky. The SABC Junior Orchestra was also created and began in February 1966 under Walter Money. Regional radio. Regional FM music stations were started in the 1960s. Popular music. Following the establishment of a republic and withdrawal from the Commonwealth of Nations in 1961, the Afrikaners' goal was to promote their culture, and so, at first, the SABC's choice of popular music reflected the National Party government's initial conservatism, especially on the Afrikaans channel, with musicians such as Nico Carstens. However, Carstens was also ostracized by the SABC, as his music was influenced by the colored and Malay communities of Cape Town. Eventually, musicians broke through the barrier when the young, English-speaking Jewish musician and composer, Charles Siegel, collaborated with the older Afrikaans lyric writer Anton de Waal to write songs. Siegel's songs like Diao Kalahari became highly popular with the Afrikaans-speaking public. However, there was tight censorship over all broadcasts, particularly of pop music, with, for example, the music of the Beatles being banned by the SABC between 1966 and March 1971. In 1966, the SABC established an external service known as Radio RSA, which broadcast in English, Swahili, French, Portuguese, Dutch and German. In 1969, the SABC held a national contest to find theme music for Radio RSA. This contest was won by the popular South African pianist and composer Charles Siegel and co-writer Dorothy Aronson. Their composition, Carousel, remained the theme song for Radio RSA right through to the 1990s. Radio RSA is now known as Channel Africa. 1996 Restructuring. In 1996 the SABC carried out a significant restructuring of the services. The main English-language radio service became SAFM. The new service, after some initial faltering, soon developed a respectable listenership and was regarded as a flagship for the new democracy. However, government interference in the state broadcaster in 2003 saw further changes to SAFM which reversed the growth and put it in rapid decline once more. Today it attracts only 0.6% of the total population to its broadcasts. The main Afrikaans radio service was renamed Radio Sonder Grense in 1995 and has enjoyed greater success with the transition. By contrast, SABC Radio's competitors, like Primedia-owned Radio 702, Cape Talk and 94.7 High Veld Stereo have grown steadily in audience and revenue, while other stations such as the black-owned and focused YFM and KUFM have also attracted black audiences. Programming policy. As of the 12th of May 2016, the SABC has implemented a policy to promote local content. 90% of all music played on the broadcaster's 18 radio stations will be sourced from a local artist with a focus on kwaito, jazz, reggae and gospel genres. Stationless television. Early history. In 1975, after years of controversy over the introduction of television, the SABC was finally allowed to introduce a color TV service, which began experimental broadcasts in the main cities on the 5th of May 1975, before the service went nationwide on the 6th of January 1976. Initially, the TV service was funded entirely through a license fee, as in the UK, but advertising began in 1978. The SABC is still partly funded by the license fee. The service initially broadcast only in English and Afrikaans, with an emphasis on religious programming on Sundays. A local soap opera, The Villages, set on a gold mine, was well received, while other local productions like The Dingleys were panned as amateurish. The majority of acquired programming on South African television came from the United States, although owing to their opposition to apartheid, some production companies stopped selling programs to the country. The British Actors Union Equity had already started a boycott of program sales to South Africa, which was not lifted until 1993. However, the Thames television police drama series The Sweeney and Van der Valk were briefly shown on SABC TV, as was the original version of Thunderbirds. Many imported programs were dubbed in Afrikaans, but in July 1986, in order to accommodate English speakers, the SABC began to simulcast the original soundtrack of series on an FM radio service called Radio 2000, allowing them to watch them in the original language. SABC TV also produced lavish musical shows featuring the most popular South African composers, solo musicians, bands and orchestras. For example, the pianist and composer, Charles Siegel, was given a half-hour special show, The Music of Charles Siegel, where a selection of his music was performed by various local artists, such as Zaian, SABC Orchestra and others. With a limited budget, early programming aimed at children tended to be quite innovative, and programs such as the Afrikaans language puppet shows Haas das Nuus Kazadoska en As Blikfontein are still fondly remembered by many. On the 1st of January 1982, two services were introduced: TV2 broadcasting in Zulu and Xhosa and TV3 broadcasting in Sotho and Tswana, both aimed at a black urban audience. The main channel, now called TV1, was divided evenly between English and Afrikaans, as before. In 1985, a new service called TV4 was introduced, carrying sports and entertainment programming, using the channel shared by TV2 and TV3, which ended transmissions at 9:30 p.m. In 1992, TV2, TV3 and TV4 were combined into a new service called CCV. A third channel was introduced known as TSS, or Top Sport Surplus, Top Sport being the brand name for the SABC's sport coverage, but this was replaced by NNTV, an educational, non-commercial channel, in 1994. Competition and restructuring. In 1986, the SABC's monopoly on TV was challenged by the launch of a subscription-based service known as Mnet, which was backed by a consortium of newspaper publishers. This service was disallowed from broadcasting its own news and current affairs programs, which were still the preserve of the SABC. The SABC's dominance was further eroded by the launch of the first free-to-air private TV channel, E.TV. Satellite television expanded when Mnet's sister company, MultiChoice, launched its digital satellite TV service in 1995. SABC TV channels are broadcast via this satellite television as well. In 1996, the SABC reorganized its 3 TV channels with the aim of making them more representative of the various language groups. These new channels were called SABC 1, SABC 2 and SABC 3. The SABC also absorbed the BOP TV station of the former Bophuthatswana Bantustan. SABC TV programs in Afrikaans and other languages are now subtitled in English, but programs in English are not usually subtitled in other languages, the perception being that all South Africans understand English. Previously, subtitling was confined to productions like operas and operettas. It was not used on TV1 on the assumption that most viewers understood both Afrikaans and English, nor on CCV, despite presenters using 2 or more different languages during a single program. New services. In 2005, the SABC proposed the creation of 2 complementary regional television channels, SABC4 and SABC5, to emphasize indigenous languages. SABC4, based in Mafeking, was to be broadcast in Tswana, Sesotho, Pedi, Tsonga, Venda, and Afrikaans, to the northern provinces of the country, while SABC5, based in Cape Town, was to broadcast in Xhosa, Zulu, Indabella, and Swazi, as well as Afrikaans, to the southern provinces. Unlike other SABC TV services, SABC4 and SABC5 were not to be available via satellite. Apart from soundbites on news or current affairs programs, no English language programming would be shown on either channel. However, the plans fell through in 2015. 2015, the SABC stated that it would launch 2 new channels, SABC Nuus and SABC Encore. In 2013, the SABC announced plans to launch a new news channel, SABC Nuus, to be available on DSTV, instead of waiting for the introduction of digital terrestrial television. According to the SABC, the factors which are considered when deciding how much time a language gets on television are the following: how many home language speakers exist in the coverage area of a channel, the geographical spread of the language, the extent to which members of a language community are able to understand other languages, the extent of marginalization of a language, the extent to which the language is understood by other South Africans, and whether there is available content that uses the language. SABC TV has an audience of over 30 million. SABC 1 reaches 89% of the public, SABC 2 reaches 91% of the public, and SABC 3 reaches 77% of the public, according to the broadcaster. The SABC has 18 radio stations, which have more than 25 million weekly listeners. Reception outside South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho and Swaziland. SABC television has also been widely available in neighboring Lesotho and Swaziland, as well as Botswana, which did not have television services of its own until 1988. After complaints from rights holders in Botswana, SABC encrypted its TV channels, thereby cutting off viewers in the country. Namibia. Until 1979, the SABC operated broadcasting services in Namibia, which was then under South African rule, but in that year, these were transferred to the Southwest African Broadcasting Corporation. However, the SABC retained technical personnel from the SABC, and a number of its programs were prepared at the SABC's studios in Johannesburg before being dispatched to Windhoek for transmission. The SABC also helped the SABC to establish a television service in 1981. This comprised a mix of programming in English, Afrikaans and German, 90% of which came from via the SABC. Programs were shown locally a week after South Africa. The SABC received SABC TV programming first by using a microwave link, and later via an Intelsat satellite link. The SABC became the Namibian Broadcasting Corporation after the country's independence in 1990. However, while this bay an enclave of South Africa in Namibia until 1994, received the SABC's TV1 on a low-power repeater, which was broadcast live via Intelsat from 1986. International services. In 1998, the SABC began to broadcast 2 TV channels to the rest of Africa: SABC Africa, a news service, and Africa to Africa, entertainment programming from South Africa and other African countries, via DSTV. In 2003, Africa to Africa was merged with SABC Africa to create a hybrid service, drawing programming from both sources. SABC Africa closed in August 2008 after the SABC's contract with DSTV was not renewed. In 2007, the SABC launched a 24-hour international news channel, SABC Nuus International, but closed in 2010. Criticisms. Accusations of pro-ANC bias. The SABC has been accused of being a government and ruling party mouthpiece, particularly in the lead-up to the 2014 South African elections, particularly after it refused to air the campaign adverts of various opposition parties, and again in 2015 when it censored the video feeds of the 2015 State of the Nation address that portrayed the ANC and President Jacob Zuma in a negative light. In 2015, Communications Minister Faith Muthambi reinforced the notion that the SABC was a state-owned company, and therefore subject to control by the ministry and the ruling party. In August 2005, the SABC came under heavy fire from independent media and the public for failing to broadcast footage in which Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka was booed off stage by members of the ANC Youth League, who were showing support for the newly axed ex-Deputy President Jacob Zuma. Rival broadcaster ETV publicly accused SABC of biased reporting for failing to show the video footage of the humiliated Deputy President. Snaki Zikalala, head of news and ex-ANC spokesperson, retorted that their cameramen had not been present at the meeting. This claim was later established to be false when ETV footage was released which showed an SABC cameraman filming the incident. The SABC's government connections also came under scrutiny when, in April 2005, Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe was interviewed live by Zikalala, who was a former ANC political commissar. The interview was deemed by the public to have sidestepped critical issues, and to have avoided difficult questions regarding Mugabe's radical land reform policies and human rights violations. Accusations of censorship. In May 2006, the SABC was accused of self-censorship when it decided not to air a documentary on South African President Thabo Mbeki, and in early June 2006, the news organization requested that the producers not speak about it. This was widely criticized by independent media groups. In response, the International Freedom of Expression Exchange issued an alert concerning the SABC's apparent trend towards self-censorship. In June 2006, the International Federation of Journalists denounced the cancelling of the Thabo Mbeki documentary, citing self-censorship and politically influenced managers. Also in June 2006, SAFM host John Perlman disclosed on air that the SABC had created a blacklist of commentators. A commission of inquiry was created by SABC CEO Dali Mpofu to investigate the allegations that individuals had been blacklisted at the behest of Zikalala. Perlman eventually resigned from SAFM, and the broadcaster came under heavy criticism from free media advocates. Shortly before the ANC's 2012 elective conference in Mangaung, the board of the SABC handed control of news, television, radio and sport to Kulaudi Motsoeneng. The board's decision was interpreted by some at the SABC as a calculated attempt to ensure that an ANC faction close to President Jacob Zuma was given positive coverage. During a press conference held by the SABC on 6 December 2012, to explain why it had prevented 3 journalists from participating in a discussion on how the media would cover the ANC's elective conference in Mangaung, Laudi Motsoeneng said that whenever the ANC is discussed on the SABC, an ANC party representative must be present. In April 2014, journalists were warned by SABC chairperson Ellen Zandile Shabalala that the phones were being wiretapped by the NIA, and reminded them to be loyal to the ANC ruling party. When challenged on the matter, Shabalala insisted that her comments had been taken out of context. The scandal erupted at the same time that the DAR official opposition accused the SABC of censorship when they stopped airing a television advert that referred to the ongoing Gandlagate scandal. In February 2015, the SABC was accused of censoring video and audio feeds of the State of the Nation address in Parliament, after opposition party F was forcefully ejected by armed plainclothes policemen after interrupting the president's speech. Footage of opposition party DA walking out in protest over the presence of the armed personnel was also censored. This was in addition to the presence of a signal jamming device that prevented journalists and MPs from being able to use the mobile devices to post news online.